Hard talk to follow and great questions from everybody within that. As I get started, many of you might not know, but the word computer used to be a job title, right? And there were people whose job it was to compute. And I think one of the most amazing things that we have with some of these AI technologies is that if you think about many jobs today, we're treating people like machines. If you're clicking draconianly 99% of the time false positive, we're treating humans like computers. And I think by having computers that can think a little more like humans, we can maybe treat humans a little less like computers on things. So as we get into things today, I wanted to start with a show of hands, because everybody's heard the word generative AI so much that I should give a trigger warning probably for using that term. But is generative AI overhyped or underhyped? So show of hands, who thinks that Gen AI is overhyped? You can be honest, everyone's friends here, right? So somewhere around maybe 20% of the audience. And who thinks it's underhyped? All right, about 10% of the audience. So on margin, people might be tired of hearing about it, right? That's my conclusion. I'm going to make the case to you that it's actually both. It's both overhyped and underhyped. And the key to understanding part of this is something that many of you may have heard about before, called Amara's Law. You might also know this as Gates' Law from Bill Gates. It's human nature to overestimate the effect of the technology in the short run and to underestimate it in the long run. Happens, it's just part of the way we're wired. Now, a few fun examples of this. Paul Krugman, if you take a look, in 2005 or so, it will become clear that the internet will have no greater impact than the fax machine. He did win a Nobel Prize, but that was a pretty incorrect prediction, right? Over the long run, at least maybe he was ordering his groceries over the fax machine and booking cars over the fax machine and all of those sorts of things. More interestingly, you can actually take a look at the chairman of IBM, Thomas Watson, who thought that the world market for computers was 5. Pretty interesting from a company of that size. So over the long run, we've been able to accomplish far more than anyone would have really anticipated. But we still suffer from some of this short-termism. Web3, no one will put their hands up, but how many of you put your life savings into NFTs? Please don't answer. I hope the answer is no on that, right? Because there had been this short-termism of the whole internet's going to get replaced. Cat JPEGs are now worth millions of dollars, right? People had seen the potential in blockchain, which is real, and it's there. But anyone who's built something knows that it takes a long time to build something that's lasting. This example came up before. I wanted to put Tesla's car up here, but I can't poke at a specific brand. But full self-driving was promised in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, right? It's the carrot that keeps moving because people's intentions are good. They see the vision for what something can do, but that gap between vision and reality is a really hard bridge to cross. And I know many of you in compliance have had to work through that for many, many years across loads of vendors. So I want to take this talk in 3 parts, right? First, I want to outline a vision for the industry and how Gen AI can actually change what we do every day, right? That will be the vision. But then I want to also get into the challenges that you encounter within generative AI. And finally, I want to take a guess at the regulatory environment, right? In terms of what might emerge here and how we think about it. Because I really want you to walk away with some pragmatics in terms of, okay, we understand what's possible. We understand what we need to overcome to get there. We understand what might be possible shorter term and longer term. And importantly, how might we think about the regulations that are emerging with this? Before I dive in, I come from a company called Smarsh. We are far and away the largest company in the world processing financial communications data. We have a distinct privilege of working across most of the largest firms in the world. And so what that turns into is all of the ways that people communicate, over 100 channels. We can actually bring them into the system. We archive petabytes of data using large-scale public cloud globally. And we've been running machine learning genuinely in production, natural language processing for 8 years now, right? We have learned a lot of lessons. I'll share some of those with you today through that. And so we run that at very large scale. We actually call what's needed in our industry regulatory grade AI, and I hope to make that clear to you guys a little bit later as to why we call it that. I personally spent the first half of my career on Wall Street. I worked in sales and trading and interest rate derivatives, which are the good kind, not the evil kind, right? And I worked through 2008, the financial crisis. I saw Washington Mutual go under. I saw Countrywide go under. And whilst I met many of the best people that I know in my life, still friends today from my time on Wall Street, I also saw the effects of misconduct firsthand. And so the second half of my career, I've really dedicated to how we actually fight this misconduct and help make the market safer. So we care a lot about financial services. We care a lot about compliance. And the last thing we care about a lot is machine learning. Our chief analytics officer has written books on deep learning and NLP, transformers for machine learning. Very importantly, with what Harry and others were saying, explainability. This is so critical in our industries. And we have a future book coming out in terms of large language models. So we run this technology in production. We stay up to date and involved in the research and the publishing and those sorts of things there. And we really love what we do. I'm not going to give you a demo. I'm not going to sell you the product. We have a booth out there for that. I'm instead going to try to actually give you all some things that can actually, really move the needle for you. So before we get into our industry, the importance of generative AI. This is a study by McKinsey, right? At the x-axis or the bottom, they're saying what percentage of spend might be on Gen AI. And then on the y-axis, what might that impact be in the industry? Doesn't mean that that's what the industry is going to spend, but the positive impact on this. We all know from what we've heard the impacts on marketing, right? Creating advertising, social media content, the impacts on engineering. GitHub Copilot's amazing. It's a lot of fun to use. But what we hear less about is risk and compliance. And you can actually see this is one of the industries that they think will be most impacted by generative AI, right? And so this is near and dear, I think, to all of our hearts in terms of, okay, what does this actually mean for us, right? Why do they say this? Because when they look at generative AI, and I love the frameworks people have given about what it's good at and bad at, the things that it's best at are work activities that involve communications, yes, supervision, yes, documentation, yes, right? And then have the potential to be automated. So if you look at the core ingredients of what the technology is good at, it actually aligns very closely with the industries that we're in. Why is this important? And why can we be confident this will change things? This is actually a breakthrough new tool in technology. And for those that have studied history, oftentimes we mistakenly think that it's ideas that really transform things. But if you take a look at scientific revolutions, it comes from a breakthrough in tools. And this is a genuine breakthrough in tools. Why is it a genuine breakthrough in tools? We're seeing for the first time that humans can pass a Turing test. Alan Turing came up with this over 50 years ago. And effectively, the machines can be mistaken for humans because they can generate a language. They can perform the beginnings of what's called zero-shot learning. They have emergent reasoning that exists on this front. And they're moving very quickly. So the reason we can and should have confidence is this is a new tool that is capable of doing new things that previous tools weren't able to do. And any time that happens, you have new opportunities to do new things. So we should all be confident that this is actually going to make a very big difference. But we have to figure out how to get from where we are to where we're going on this front. So taking a stab at this, how will generative AI impact RegTech? Harry had mentioned this earlier. There are really 4 ways to think about machine learning, which are automations, insights, predictions, and recommendations. And what I think we've seen from everybody's work within this is generative AI is very bad at things like recommendations and predictions. It is one tool in the arsenal of tools. We are not going to throw away all machine learning in favor of just Gen AI. But it is very good at things like automation and insights. So when we take a look at this, and this is just me speculating, right? I think we're already seeing, right, that within AML, text generation, again, situational awareness reports, right? That's something that can be, at minimum, sped up through work and help in terms of what's happening in the industry. Transaction analysis, when you have memos and you need to understand what is actually being said within that. You move on to KYC, how we do KYC screening, the collection of documents, data, right? Again, that's something where we can have automation in place to speed up what people do. And certainly customer investigations, very important and critical part in terms of how this operates. Now, where we operate, market abuse, again, we've been using all forms of machine learning in some way, shape, or form for many years within communications surveillance. It's been one of the early entrants for financial services into large-scale natural language processing. And again, you get into things, whether it's employee investigations or identifying customer mistreatment or making sure that the documents that you have meet marketing requirements, you can begin to see through the lens of automations and insights where machines may be able to actually facilitate and help your team. Where we can actually take work that, again, is people clicking false positive almost all day long and actually turn that into an ability for them to use a different part of their brain, generate different insights on that front. I won't get through all of it, but hopefully you all can see, and we see, that the possibilities are important and impactful in terms of what we do. So let's get into the challenges we'll face. These are very real. As I'm sure many of you have seen, these machines have had a tendency to hallucinate. Someone had mentioned this earlier, right? But effectively, ChatGPT is always confident and sometimes right. Right? It might remind you of an aunt or uncle you've had at some point, at the dinner table, right? So these machines are hallucinating facts that don't exist. Well, in mission-critical compliance systems, that's unacceptable for that to happen, right? There are important things about explainability and audit that have to exist within these, and I'll touch on that in a minute. You also have cost and performance. This is going to come down over time, but if you've got 1 billion communications a year, it's probably pretty expensive to run everything across that. So you want to be targeted in terms of how you spend your budgets, how you get the most value from your use cases. And then also, importantly, repeatability. Right now, many of these machines are designed to give kind of innovative responses every time. But one thing that we need to have and must have in compliance is that ability to stay constant over time. And this has been something that has been personally a strong conviction of mine. I had an opportunity many years ago to fly over to Zurich to meet with an unnamed investment bank, the board, and the CEO. And the CEO said to me, one of the things I love about your technology, Brandon, is that it doesn't get tired, and it doesn't change its mind, and it shows up consistently every day. Because whilst we talk about things that are very important, like bias in machine learning, we should also be aware that bias is a very important thing within human judgment. There's a fantastic Harvard Business Review article by a gentleman named Daniel Kahneman. I don't know if any of you have read Thinking Fast and Slow. Fantastic book. Daniel Kahneman is an octogenarian Nobel Prize winner, and he helped to come up with much of what we know about human bias. And he wrote this incredible article called Overcoming the High and Hidden Cost of Noise. And when they dug in, they found it was shocking the difference that not only you would have across groups of people making judgments, but even within a group, right? You all may have seen the studies that, like, if you actually have a jury trial, hopefully no one's ever, in a criminal trial themselves, you are more likely to be convicted with an afternoon trial than a morning trial because the judge is tired and they're more likely to fall back on their predilection to just say, okay, I don't want to make a mistake. And so there's a big difference in terms of these things here. So we have to begin by recognizing, and this is important in internal communications, we're not starting with an unbiased system. We're starting with a very biased system, right? And what we can hope to do and what we need to do is to actually remove as much bias from that system as possible. So this brings me to explainability and audit. This is really important. I loved the questions in terms of, will this replace jobs? And the answer is yes, but it's not a binary question. This is a journey. What we really are beginning to have here is, if you were to take a look at airlines, you had autopilot for pilots that exists right now. And there is a person who is overriding that autopilot, right? We're beginning to have autopilot effectively for some of these compliance solutions that we solve within this here. However, we can't actually have something like airplane autopilot just going on its own, right? It has the lives of people that it's actually responsible for. And similarly, within our system, we can't have this on its own. So what do you need to have within this? There's a very important aspect that I think a lot of people forget called machine learning ops or machine learning operations. And what that means is that for the systems that you have to have things like versioning, rollback, controls, explainability, the ability to drill down and understand at component levels what's working, what's not working, to be able to change that out. You need to have model risk management reports. You need to understand the details of your pipeline. You need to make sure you are using the best tool for the job, right? You need explainability in certain areas where you can crack open the model and the situation and understand exactly why it made the decision it did. In other situations, you will want to use things like generative AI that might be less explainable, but they're still risk reducing for your company. So how we do explainability, how we perform audit, these things are going to change, but it doesn't mean there's not an answer, right? There are answers. So one thing I would encourage you all, as you are continuing to go down the machine learning journey on this front, I fully believe with high conviction, right, that we have the ability to automate a tremendous amount. And the reason I know that is that we have worked with banks across the world, and we have had situations and meetings where the compliance officer will have to leave the meeting during the POC readout because the machine discovered something critical that a person could not. So it is possible for machines to automate this, but in the same way we couldn't fly planes without air traffic control, like you can't have a machine learning system by downloading an open source repo or calling an API. You have to have all of the systems and controls to actually put that in place. And that, to your earlier question, is actually how you begin to scale. And this will happen not overnight, right? But it'll be building block by building block by building block. And so 1 year from now, people are going to go, maybe that technology was overpromising. But 40 years from now, people are going to look back and go, wow, we had no idea how much we were able to accomplish. So as we take a look at this, I clearly have nothing more to say. The view on the regulation side of this, right? And I know it's always a little risky to speculate on this, but I wanted to give people a framework for how we are thinking about this. Because if you think about how people communicate, this is fundamentally beginning to change. Today, we have employees communicating with each other and with customers, right? These are what we think about when we think about capturing communications, archiving those communications, surveilling. But we have new entrants in the market. We have machines that are beginning now to talk to employees and talk to customers. And importantly, we have machines that are now beginning to talk machine to machine. So this fabric of how people communicate and what our jobs mean is beginning to change. So it leads to these questions of what to capture, what to archive, what to surveil, what does this actually look like? We've done a lot of work on this. A colleague of mine, Robert Cruz, is here. And what we've done is we've tried to put together a framework, if you're interested, talk to him, that speaks to what this actually looks like, how we can think of, for example, right, if a person is communicating with a machine and that machine is effectively hermetically sealed, it's kind of like an intelligent Word document. They can't go engage in any misconduct if the machine can't actually do anything, right? So there's a nice parallel for those sorts of things. But if a machine is talking to an employee and there's emergent properties to that, or a customer, and you don't know what that machine is going to say, you probably need to archive and surveil that communication, because if something is done incorrectly, or there's a lawsuit, or there's discovery after the fact, you're going to need that. So Robert's put together a great framework in terms of this. I think that as an industry, we need to work together to think about the principles of how do we keep things safe, right? How do we make sure that we can do our jobs effectively, and what does this look like, and how does this make sense? But it's changing right now, which is why having a view on these things is important for what we do. Lastly, if you're getting started, two things for you to think about. One is your data infrastructure, and two is thinking about proof. Within the data infrastructure, again, it's nice to see an OpenAI API. It's very powerful. But the communications that your company sits on are a strategic asset of the company. And I would say fewer than 10% of companies that I speak to have a communications data strategy. If you want to get full value out of your communications, you need to build it scalably. You need to make sure that you can capture the data. You need to treat these communications like a communications data warehouse. You need to have regulatory-grade AI and ML ops actually built in. You need to then have your supervision and surveillance functions and your APIs. And you need these things all working together, because the stakeholders for your data are not going to go down. Right? Over 75% of our customers find that different groups within their companies need access to the communications data that goes beyond compliance. And so thinking right now, if you're playing the long game, which we all have to play, you need to have that appropriate foundation in place so that as you have new use cases and automations and those sorts of things, you are not left without air traffic control, which none of us want to be. But for many of us, these systems are so stitched together, right, that you move one thing and the other thing breaks. And so having that in place is critical. The second thing is proof, right? You need to be able to sniff out the emoji, right? And part of this, and I loved what MasterCard was saying with respect to demos and those sorts of things, it's so easy for people to create a POC. As Elon Musk says, prototypes are easy, production is hard, and being cash flow positive is excruciating, right? And I think it is a completely true statement in terms of the work that's required and how we do this. But as you look at this, if you maintain a lens of prove it to me on my data, number one, and number two, do you have your air traffic control actually set up? If you maintain that lens, you will be able to appropriately sniff things out, because marketing and hype versus reality is going to make people go, well, that didn't work. And the fact of the matter is, I think we all need to maintain the long view of it's going to change so much of what we do, and the way we're going to get there is brick by brick. So thank you all for the time. Really appreciate it.